Curiosity began with the sound of hooves crunching over ice. Out on the Montana plains, the world was white to the horizon, quiet, endless, and aching. Rhett Lawson reined his horse at the edge of the frozen creek, squinting against the storm that sifted through the trees like ash. He was not a man who believed in miracles. He had seen too much winter for that. Yet something stirred in him when he noticed a patch of color against the snow, a faded blue shawl fluttering weakly in the wind. He dismounted, every breath misting in the cold. The shape beneath that cloth was human. Kneeling beside it, Rhett brushed away the powder of snow until he saw her face, a young woman, pale as frost, her dark lashes trembling. She wasn't dead, though the cold had nearly taken her. He pressed his fingers to her wrist and felt a faint pulse, stubborn as the flicker of a candle about to die. Without hesitation, he gathered her into his arms. She was light, too light, her hair smelling faintly of smoke and wild sage. When she stirred, she murmured something, his name, he thought, but that couldn't be. He'd never seen her before. The wind howled, impatient, urging him home. He tightened his hold and carried her toward the distant silhouette of his ranch, its roof nearly buried in snow. Inside, the fire had burned low. He laid her on the worn couch near the hearth, stripped off her soaked shoes, and covered her with wool blankets. For a long time he just watched, waiting for signs of life beyond her shallow breaths. The storm raged outside, but here, time stood still. She woke before dawn, her lips cracked and her eyes wide with confusion. He poured water into a tin cup and offered it to her. "You're safe," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You were out there all night." Her gaze darted around the room, timid, searching, afraid of being a burden. She tried to sit, but pain crossed her face when she moved her right leg. Rhett noticed the limp immediately, though he said nothing. Instead, he stirred the fire, the light reflecting off the scar that cut across his jaw, an old wound from another winter long ago. Where am I?" she whispered. "Lawson Ranch. About a mile south of town." She nodded faintly, then seemed to retreat inside herself, like someone long practiced at vanishing. When she spoke again, her voice carried the tremor of someone unused to kindness. "You shouldn't have stopped for me." Rhett tilted his head. "And let the snow keep you? I reckon that's not how a man sleeps at night." She turned away, staring into the flames. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, just careful. Later, when she was strong enough to eat, he set a bowl of stew before her. She hesitated before taking the spoon, her fingers trembling as if expecting the food to be snatched away. He didn't ask her story that night. He just said, "Eat. Tomorrow, we'll see about finding your way." But she didn't eat much. When he stepped outside to feed the horses, he caught sight of her through the window, her shoulders hunched, her face lit by the fire's glow, her eyes wet with something he didn't yet understand. By morning, the snow had eased. Rhett brewed coffee and leaned against the counter, studying her as she limped carefully across the floor, steadying herself on the wall. Pride was written in the line of her jaw. She refused his hand when he offered it, and something in him respected that more than he could say. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, as though even that had been taken from her. "Evelyn," she said finally, her voice soft but certain. "That's a good name," Rhett replied, almost smiling. "Evelyn. You're lucky I was riding that way." "I don't think luck has much to do with it." Her eyes, now clearer, met his. Maybe the snow just ran out of mercy. He didn't argue. He'd known that kind of mercy himself once. As the hours passed, bits of her story came out, not in confession, but in fragments carried on the quiet. Her family had lived east of town, on poor soil and dwindling hope. She'd been born with a limp, and as she grew older, her mother called it her shame. Men came calling for her sisters, but never for her. When her father died, her brother-in-law took charge of the household and saw her as another mouth to feed. So when the winter came hard, he sold her. For a horse, a few coins, and the promise that she wouldn't come back. Rhett listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening. He'd seen cruelty before, but there was something about the calm with which she spoke, without bitterness, without self-pity, that twisted at him. "And you just walked out into the snow?" he asked quietly. "I walked away," she said. "Didn't much care where to." Rhett turned back to the fire, his eyes catching the orange glow. "You'll stay here till you're strong enough to decide what's next." "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." He didn't look at her when he said it, but the words landed like a promise. In the days that followed, the rhythm of the ranch adjusted around her presence. She moved slowly but worked without complaint, mending torn gloves, folding blankets, feeding the fire before he could. Each small act seemed to return a piece of her humanity she'd lost along the way. And though Rhett was a man of few words, she noticed the way his silence softened, the way his eyes lingered when he thought she wasn't looking. The townsfolk began to whisper, as they always did. Mrs. Calloway from the general store told anyone who'd listened that Rhett Lawson had taken in a strange woman, one who limped like a wounded deer. Some said it was pity, others said loneliness. None of them knew the truth, that inside the snowbound cabin, something unspoken was taking root. One evening, Evelyn stood at the window, the wind singing low through the pines. Rhett was outside, mending a fence in the fading light. The firelight behind her flickered across her face, turning her eyes to amber. She watched him until he turned toward her, his figure framed by the falling dusk. In that moment, without words, something shifted. He raised his hand slightly, a small, wordless acknowledgement, and she, almost shyly, returned it. That night, when she sat by the fire, she whispered, "I used to think being lame meant broken. But the snow doesn't ask how you walk, only if you keep walking." Rhett paused from his whittling. "And you did." "I didn't have much choice." He smiled faintly. "Most don't. But you did it anyway." Their eyes met again, and for a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. The snow, the gossip, the ghosts of both their pasts. There was only warmth, and the quiet understanding that survival could be its own kind of grace. When she retired to the small room he'd given her, she lay awake listening to the wind against the walls. For the first time in years, the sound didn't frighten her. It felt like a lullaby, like the world itself was breathing beside her. In the main room, Rhett stirred the embers until they glowed soft and steady. He looked toward her door and thought of the moment he'd found her, blue shawl, frozen hair, that stubborn pulse beneath his fingers. He'd thought he was saving her that morning. Now he wasn't so sure who had saved whom. Outside, the snow fell quietly over the plains, covering their footprints, their pain, their secrets. The world slept beneath its white silence, but inside that lonely cabin, something had begun to wake, slowly, gently, like dawn breaking after a very long night. The thaw began not with sunshine but with sound, the soft drip of melting snow from the eaves, a rhythm echoing the slow warming between two lonely souls. Evelyn stood at the cabin window, her reflection faint against the glass. Outside, Rhett was harnessing the horses, his breath fogging in the pale morning light. The days had grown longer, the wind less cruel, yet she still felt the chill of her old life clinging to her skin. Gratitude filled her heart for the man who had rescued her, but with it came a quiet fear, of overstaying, of being unwanted once more. Rhett noticed her watching him. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture so simple yet so kind it unsettled her. Every day he offered her space, never questions, never pity, and in that space, her dignity began to bloom again. She moved more confidently through the cabin now, her limp still present but no longer the first thing people noticed. When she caught Rhett's gaze lingering too long, heat rose to her cheeks, though neither spoke of it. They had found a rhythm, unspoken, fragile. She cooked, he repaired the roof, they shared quiet suppers by the fire. Sometimes she told stories about her mother's garden or how the meadowlarks sang at dusk. Rhett listened with an attentiveness that felt like reverence. She wondered what loss had shaped him into such a gentle man. Once, she asked if he had always lived alone. His reply was slow, weighted. Not always. Some winters just take more than they give. He didn't explain, and she didn't press. One afternoon, while gathering wood near the barn, Evelyn heard hooves approaching. A sleigh cut through the snow, carrying two figures cloaked against the cold. Rhett appeared from the stable, suspicion in his stance. The sleigh halted, and the driver pulled back his hood. Evelyn froze. It was Silas Boone, her brother-in-law. His face was red from drink, his smirk as cruel as she remembered. "Well, I'll be damned," Silas drawled, sliding off the sleigh. "You really did land on your feet, girl. Fancy place you've got here." His eyes shifted to Rhett, sharp and measuring. "You must be the one harboring my runaway." Rhett's voice was calm, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. "She's no runaway. She's a guest in my home." Silas laughed. "Guest? She's property, Lawson. Bought and paid for. She's been costing me ever since she limped off like a fool." Evelyn's breath seized. The old fear clawed at her throat, that same sense of being less than human. But Rhett took a step forward, planting himself between her and the man who had sold her life away. "You best take your lies back to town," he said, his tone low, steady. "No man owns another." Silas sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're getting into, Lawson. That woman's cursed. Broke her leg young and never walked right since. She's more trouble than she's worth." Evelyn's face burned with shame, but Rhett didn't flinch. He looked Silas dead in the eye. "You say she's broken. I say she's the strongest person I've ever met." Silas spat on the ground. "You'll regret this," he muttered before climbing back into his sleigh. "When she turns on you, don't say I didn't warn you." He flicked the reins, and the horses lurched forward, disappearing down the white road. Evelyn stood trembling, her hands clasped so tightly they ached. Rhett turned to her, his face unreadable. "You all right?" She nodded, though tears came anyway. "He's been calling me that my whole life. Broken. Useless. I thought if I kept quiet, maybe people would stop seeing it." Rhett stepped closer, not touching her, just close enough that his presence steadied her shaking. "You can't hide what was never your fault." "I can't be what I'm not," she whispered. "You already are," he said simply. "Someone who survived." The words undid her. For the first time in years, she cried freely, no longer holding the sound in her throat. He didn't move, didn't comfort her with touch or empty promises, only stood there, sharing the silence until her tears slowed. That night, as the wind pressed against the cabin walls, Rhett sat carving a small wooden horse. Evelyn watched him, the steady scrape of his knife against the grain filling the room. When he was done, he set it beside her bowl. "For you," he said. "A reminder that running doesn't always mean fleeing. Sometimes it just means finding your own pace." She traced the horse's shape, her fingers trembling. "You're a strange man, Rhett Lawson." He smiled faintly. "Been called worse." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky a pale gold. Evelyn walked outside, the snow crunching beneath her boots. She hesitated on the porch, testing her leg. It hurt, but the pain felt clean, honest. She took a few steps farther, her hair catching the light. Behind her, Rhett emerged from the barn. "Careful," he called softly. She turned, smiling for the first time without fear. "I'm tired of being careful." She took another step, then another, her limp still there but her stride unbroken. Rhett watched in quiet awe. Something in his chest lifted, something buried beneath too many winters of solitude. She turned back to him, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and said, "You gave me back something I didn't think I'd ever find again." "What's that?" "Myself." In town, word of Silas Boone's failed confrontation spread quickly. Mrs. Calloway, once eager for gossip, now defended Evelyn fiercely. "That girl's got more backbone than any of us," she told the others. "And if Lawson's smart, he'll never let her go." But Rhett wasn't thinking about letting her go. He was thinking about the coming spring, the thaw that would open the roads, the fields that would need tending. He imagined her beside him, laughing in the sun. The thought frightened him for its tenderness. He'd promised himself long ago never to need anyone again. Yet here she was, undoing that vow with a glance. One evening, she found him repairing a bridle near the stable. The light of dusk wrapped around them like a secret. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Every winter," he said. "But then spring comes, and I remember why I stay." She nodded, understanding more than he said. I don't know where I belong yet. He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe belonging isn't somewhere you find. Maybe it's someone who sees you as you are and still wants to stay. Her heart stilled. No confession could have meant more. That night, they stood together outside the cabin as the stars appeared, cold, bright, endless. The silence between them was no longer careful. It was alive. When Rhett finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. You know, Evelyn, the snow remembers everything. Every footprint, every fall. But it also remembers when someone stands back up. She looked at him, her eyes shining in the starlight. Then let it remember us. He smiled, a quiet promise in his gaze. It will. As the wind carried the scent of pine and thawing earth, Evelyn leaned on the porch rail, the night calm around them. She didn't feel broken anymore. She felt whole, stitched together by mercy, by quiet understanding, by love that didn't need declaring. Somewhere deep within the silence of the plains, a new season was stirring. And though neither spoke of what came next, both knew this winter had changed them. The snow might melt, the roads might open, but the memory of that cold morning, the girl in the snow and the man who saw her truth, would linger like warmth that refused to fade.